Welcome to Professor Game Podcast, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who brings the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I teach and work at IE Business School in Madrid, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Want to know more? Go to professorgame.com/subscribe, start on our email list, and ask me anything. So hello Engagers, today we have another special guest as usual. This time we have Jordan, but Jordan, before we get started, are you prepared to engage?
I am.
Jordan, so let's do this because Jordan, DeVries, how do I pronounce that?
DeVries, you got it right the first time.
DeVries, there you go. So he's the director of UX at Brave UX, based in Washington, D.C. And some of his clients include Royal Caribbean, Marriott, Discovery Networks, Gensler, Eli Lilly, Rosetta Stone, and ClearChannel. His first exposure to gaming was watching his mother beat Super Mario World, and his most recent gaming achievement is reaching Elite in Smash Bros. Ultimate Online. So fantastic. That sounds great, Jordan.
Yes.
Anything that we missed that we should be adding to this intro?
No. That was perfect.
Fantastic. So, Jordan, we always like to know a little bit more about our guests. So, of course, we always have this beautiful intro in which I'm guessing that you have some pretty sweet discounts in touristy things like Royal Caribbean, Marriott, and so on.
Sure.
But other than that, what does a day with Jordan look like? What's your day-to-day? What are you doing usually? What does it feel like to be Jordan DeVries in a day like today?
That is a fantastic question. One thing is that I'm inundated with user interfaces. From when I first wake up, I have a smart display on my nightstand next to me. I have a Nintendo Switch Lite, and I'm playing games on the Metro commute in. Being a small agency, my daily responsibilities split evenly between coordinating with clients and helping them understand the broader strategies, collaborating with my team members here, and just trying to stay on top of all of the crazy things that are evolving and happening quite rapidly. Being based here in DC, a lot of that is obviously political, but just seeing how technology is pervading and evolving at such a break pace. And then in the evening, just to kind of unwind, I'll sit in front of another screen and, watch some streaming media. But I'm also a very avid video game player. And then I try to make sure that I see friends and other things like that. But that's really a good cycle, a good common typical day in my life.
So it sounds exciting as well. Lots of playing in the morning, lots of playing in the afternoon. I wish I had a bit more time to play more.
Oh, you and me both.
That's my conclusion.
Yes, exactly.
So Jordan, we want to flip this on its head and start with a question we always love to have our guests answer. And it is about fail or first attempt in learning or failure, however you want to call it. Do you have a story of failure that we can know of? I mean, of course, you can sanitize it as you wish, protect the innocent and so on.
Sure.
Especially when, creating games, gamification or anything within these worlds. And of course, we want to learn from that experience. We want to be there with you. So take us down to the ground level and tell us what your, conclusions, how did you get out of it, whatever the outcome was.
Sure. So I have a lot of friends who like playing board games and party games. My issue had been, however, that I had a group of friends that really liked very complex, sophisticated games that probably took 4 or 5 hours to really get through. And then I had another group of friends that liked the idea of board gaming, but they were always very, very hesitant to kind of dive into a deeper world. And so what I was trying to do was to create a party-style game that would lightly introduce some of the more complex game mechanics. So, a simple card game, but you would be able to buy new cards, upgrade your cards, etc. So I had this brilliant idea based on a friend was adopting a cat, and we were coming up with funny celebrity pet names for their cat, like Kim Kardashian, that sort of thing. And the brilliant idea I had was a card game called House of Cats. And the way that it would work is that we would all be cat hoarders, and there'd be a deck of cats, and each cat would have its own preferences. And the idea was to teach the player the idea of creating and balancing various cat toys, treats, other things in their hand, if you will, to try and optimize the likelihood of the next cat coming to them. Now, here's where the failure part came in. while it was very funny and we came up with some great names and I had printed it out on cardstock and it was a great little prototype, I had made some incorrect assumptions about rational behavior. And what I found was that rather than trying to play for the most logical move, and admittedly I was the game designer, so I had a very particular view or perspective of what the logic should be in the game world. My friends were making these brash, irrational moves, and they were kind of creating these runaway conditions where they were basically unstoppably ahead in the lead. So that was my first failure lesson, which was that you can plan these systems, but the systems can be, and not out of malice. My friends weren't trying to be jerks to me. It was just it was a game night, right? They were going to do whatever they're going to do, and they were able to find these unintended play states. So that was the first failure. But the surprise that I got out of it, and what I learned was that even though the friends that I had tried this on were the most competitive friends I could find, a lot of the fun that they were having, even for the people that had no hope of winning, no hope of coming in first place, wasn't how high of the rank was. It was their ability to interact and still respond and affect other players. So this kind of mad scramble to, in this particular game, kick other people while they were down was giving the players just as much fun and engagement, and it was less so who was in first place. So the two big lessons, and this was early on in my gamification arc, as I was learning more about this discipline, was this idea that you have to recognize and embrace the impulsive, irrational, emotional behavior. And I think that's probably just as important in the broader human experience, right? We're not all automatons, we're all not machines. And that when we are engaging with our players or our learners, sometimes it's less so about the points and more so about the agency. As long as they all still have something to do, they can still have a great time.
So very interesting conclusions there. I'm guessing that you were able to iterate as well on that game after trying it with your friends and seeing their reactions. I'm getting many things from that experience, and I'm getting excited about what that meant for your future designs and creations, right?
Yes, 100%. And also the importance of having a really good friend network that they can be patient with you and willing to entertain your ideas. But it did shade a lot about how we approach human behavior and the common sources of frustrations, not just within games, but also in broader systems that we see in my discipline of user experience.
Fantastic. That sounds like a great experience. And again, we're going to make a 180-degree spin on the subject, and we're going to go for the opposite. Actually, a challenge that you faced, something big, something interesting that came to you, and you solved it using strategies that you learned from games or something around those lines. Do you have such a story that you can tell us? And of course, we want to know, what do you think were the factors to success? How did it go? Like, what happened? We want to be there with you.
100%. So we're a small agency, and we get approached a lot, not just by the big names, but we also like to take on a lot of projects that have a lot of impact and meaning for us. So in the United States right now, and certainly not unique to the United States, but we're dealing with a lot of wealth inequality. And it's interesting that we look at things like games and we look at how games can motivate people, but we start to kind of understand the difference between intrinsic motivation, people doing things for their own sake, and extrinsic motivation. So that's earning the rewards, and money being very, very fundamentally extrinsic. So the startups approached us, and their idea was to try to figure out how to gamify financial education. And the core challenge here is that a lot of financial health rather is simply just to be assumed that it's how much money you have access to in your bank accounts, or if you even have a bank account in the case of some of our users. And what we were trying to better understand was, how can we put some agency back in the player's hand, in the user's hand, and how could we try to figure out a fundamental perspective shift from the solvency, liquidity of finance into wellness? So that even if you were, early on in your journey into finances, you could have a healthier relationship with that, and how we could best figure out how to create game thinking and kind of reclaim some of the negative aspects of how the American economic system can feel sometimes, in terms of, things not certainly not being fair, but also not just being fair, but very, very unclear. So kind of a lack of transparency that has kind of engendered a lot of skepticism. So that was the key crux of it. That was the challenge. How could we do that fundamental perspective shift, which is very, very hard? And I say this as someone who's an avid learner. we like to we like to be comfortable. We all like to have our routines and our habits and our worldview. And even for people who want to have their worldview shaken, it can be really, really challenging to get that to stick. And so we decided to try and explore gamification. And one of the reasons why we wanted to explore gamification through this is that we saw that a lot of games, they put you into a challenging situation deliberately. Like when you're playing Tetris, Tetris doesn't just automatically solve itself for you, right? Tetris keeps throwing you pieces and pieces faster and faster and faster. And the fun arguably comes from seeing how much an individual player can handle. So we were trying to understand how this challenge, this true challenge, and maybe a safer way for users to embrace that challenge, try and make decisions or try and respond within this app, make their mistakes, even be transparent and show them how the same mistakes they've made, their peers also made the same mistake. So they feel a little bit less isolated and they feel a little less behind as they are kind of growing in this broader arc, and then marry that with a quantifiable, measurable sense of progress, which was incredibly key. So yes, we can use badges. Yes, we can use points. Yes, we can use tiers, but they're done in this really, really fun loop where when you are trying to take control of your financial situation, you often can't necessarily go out and do something every day besides going to work or looking for employment. You're not making a new bank account every day, for example. So what could we do to make sure that our users stayed engaged? Well, figuring out the gamification aspect was really tightly wound with the educational aspect. So everything from simple quizzes to like models and simulations to predictions, and then figuring out how we could do some tried and true gamification techniques like our tiers and points and things like that to get users from one point to the next. And in so doing, we were able to help users, whether they were financially well off or they were financially struggling, take control back over their outlook, their perspective, and better equip themselves mentally to face a challenge. And we built these good habits. This sense of it's almost like a workout where they could learn a little bit more about investment, they could learn a little bit more about retirement, and they can do so in this collaborative way where they could challenge their partners, they could challenge their family members, they could challenge their friends, but do so in a respectful way. And so this all would not have been possible without game thinking, without setting up goals, without putting challenges in front of our users, without giving them a pathway of journey through this, without giving the users opportunities to decide which paths to take. Because otherwise, frankly, it's just an application that makes you feel bad and would lecture you otherwise. And so that was kind of the big success, the big win there. We've rolled this out as a test pilot program here in Washington, D.C. We've gone deliberately after a broad spectrum of users. So we have people that are freshly out of university and they're dealing with student loan debt. We have people who are very skeptical of the banking system and they are keeping cash underneath their mattresses. And what we're finding is that there's a strong sense of hope, there's a strong sense of optimism, and frankly, there's a good sense of engagement where people are constantly coming back and they're starting to understand and they're starting to see the steps they need to take. And this is helping giving them a leg up and introducing some transparency into the financial world. And as a result, they are saving more and they're opening up checking accounts and they are looking into retirement and other things like that, things that they never thought would have been possible for them in the past. So it's been incredibly gratifying and uplifting to see this kind of be pioneered. And like I said, it all boils down to finding gamification.
Interesting. Very interesting because, well, for me, recently I've had experience, I guess, in the US and in many other places as well, the whole financial situation for people who are not maybe in the banking system, maybe many other circumstances who are in the banking system and getting, loans that are not good for their financial health. Like there's so many situations around finance. And given that most of us are not ever going to be experts in finance in any capacity, getting that basic level of understanding that actually gets you through the day-to-day and retirement and so many other things, I think is very crucially important. And I'm happy to see that there's quite a few people tackling that. And it seems like your strategy is very, very exciting, very engaging and getting results. Do you have any small or big results that you can share? Like, I don't know, percentages or I don't know, something that you can share.
I can share broad trends and early trends because
Sure.
it's definitely part of a pilot study. I can point out a few things that surprised me in terms of efficacy. One was that we whether it's a questionnaire, whether it's a quiz module, whether it's a simulation within this, we don't just show you what the correct answer is, but we showed you the percentage of answers that other people in roughly your cohort answered as well. And so I can't get into too specifics about the cohort, but it's broadly people that are like you, so that you're not feeling that you're competing against the expert day traders,
a banker,
Wall Street, right? Exactly, yeah. So you don't constantly feel like you're a novice, and that was such a powerful motivating factor because it instilled this sense of healthy competition. So the first thing that we believe we observed was this idea of relief, which is, I got that wrong, but 80% of other people got this wrong as well. And that appears to help have made certain of these lessons stick better. But it also became this powerful forward momentum factor where the player wanted to see, well, what did people guess for the next question and the next question and the next question? And that's one of the beautiful things about interactive interfaces is that, and games really, is that you get that instant feedback. It's not like taking an exam where you've got several hours to yourself and then it might be days, if not weeks, before you find out what your results are. That instant feedback actually really was instrumental in helping people change their trajectory. So that's one thing that we found that was incredibly powerful. The second thing that we found, and this is actually a trend that we'd seen in an earlier health and wellness product that we did for the federal government here in the States, was this idea that the sense of pride that users have. And let me unpack that a little bit further. We just as a trial wanted to experiment with very, very simple customization as a reward. So you'd basically be able to customize your avatar, or you'd be able to customize your colors, or have access to better themes. And we would find, especially in some of our earlier projects, that while no adult would ever admit to caring about this, almost all of them would immediately customize their avatar. And when they unlocked new avatars, they would swap it. Yes, exactly, right. Yeah. And so, we deliberately avoided the pay to win, buying better armor or whatever, what have you. That's into a lot of these games these days, those microtransactions. But there was the signaling that sense of prestige. And that was a very positive motivating factor too. And that really goes to, especially when you're doing user research and analysis, it isn't always what people are saying. And sometimes it's just simply what they're doing.
It's what they're doing, exactly.
Yeah.
No, and I had an interview recently with Loretta Bruning. She is talking about, the brain chemicals and, how mammals behave. Like it's a sort of a different topic in a way, but it connects very well to this because one of the I can't remember because I'm not that good for those chemicals and things, but there was one of the brain chemicals that is about, not just, social interaction, but it's about social priming. Like, where are you, standing? And that's exactly the message that you're sending there. You're saying, well, I was able to reach this level into social priming. So, I don't care, quote unquote, about this, but I'm going to send it out because I want to say, I'm priming here. if that makes any sense.
It does. And that actually does remind me of another brain chemical. And this might be the same one because brain chemistry is from my limited understanding, is incredibly complex. But there's studies done about dopamine and how much dopamine floods into your brain. And the long and short of these studies found that, at least in rat brains and mammal brains, the dopamine is strongest when you receive the signal, when you're told,
when you're expecting the reward.
Exactly,
it's a different one, but yes, I mean, if you should go back to episode, I can't remember which one it is, or by now I'm not sure if it's out. It's 110 or 11, and then she explains in very much detail the four happy, what she calls the happy chemicals. Dopamine is one.
Yes.
Oxytocin. I think serotonin and endorphins. I think those are the four. I might be missing one, or one is mistaken, but something along those lines. And for me, it was super interesting because it's a topic we never dive deep into. But Jordan, we want to go deep into the next subject as well, because you seem to be doing very, very interesting things. So we would like to know if you have, when you approach these projects, I'm guessing that this is LifeSense that you're talking about.
Yes.
or the card game that you were mentioning before, do you have some sort of mind process, physical process? Like, how do you approach a project when you have a problem you want to solve? How do you do it? Do you have a structure, a system, process? What does it look like?
That's a great question. We definitely have a process, and it starts with a word that I can never, ever pronounce correctly. And I'm going to say it one time, and then I'm going to simply refer to it as a shorthand. But it's this word called verisimilitude. And that's a fancy way of saying, how can we find an accurate enough model or an accurate enough simulation with enough details to make an experience feel correct? So let me unpack that a little bit further. So many video games. So there's a new video game that just came out, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Mechanically, the video game is incredibly similar to many other video games that have come out recently. But the key difference is that it makes you a Jedi Knight. And so it's this idea of a little bit of the role and the fantasy and the wish fulfillment. So it's the same attacks and the same jumping and the climbing and so on and so forth. But each of these is wrapped together in this simulation and this role and this concept that's very, very distinct. And so both in gamification projects and in user experience in general, it's really about finding what is the user's mental model, what is the user's mental role they can step into, and what are the most salient points that you can bring, the salient details that you can help bring them forward to help them live out this process. So a key example in LifeSense is that, yes, we could make the user go and dig up their tax forms and figure out their income and figure out how much their retirements are, or we can have them figure out and just kind of give a ballpark guess, because it's more so about the scale and how the money would shape and change over time, and less so about it being accurate down to the cent in order to teach them the overall lesson and have them complete the game. Most games, even games like, Grand Theft Auto, they don't make the player brush their teeth, right? There's a certain point where having additional accuracy doesn't enhance the experience. And so that's really the tricky thing where when users can get
6 hours.
right, exactly. Make sure that you have a multivitamin and make sure that you're well hydrated. So what the core of our process and where we start is to figure out what is that minimum mental model? Because we see this happening over and over where we think it's rooted back in simple physical concepts like how to reach for a doorknob before you open a door and walk into a room, where whenever you're encountering a new situation, you're basically trying to map this towards the patterns that are most familiar to you. And one of the pattern engines in your mind that you simply can't turn off for most people is the physics engine running in the back of your mind, right? How do you put one foot in front of the other? How do you sit down? How do you reach for things? So on and so forth. So we do try to next, after we try to figure out a mental framework, figure out the broad objects, the broad big concepts or metaphors. And then from there, we figure out how we can flow between which objects the users look for first, second, and third. There's a tricky nuance here in process where a lot of the things that we make, both in terms of games and in apps and all these other experiences, are all about action. It's all about the verb. It's all about what can this thing do? It's less so about the hammer that I'm holding and more so about the fact that I can fasten things. And that's important. But in practice, when users get frustrated and when users are, or even when users feel happy, is that the handholds that they're reaching for are the objects, they're the nouns. And I think if you look at, 87% or something of the world's languages put the noun before the verb. And so what we found is that when we're looking at process, if we can identify the objects, the tangible concepts first, and then use those as the anchors, I'm begging my question here by using anchor as a metaphor, but this idea of we can start there, then the verbs and all the things that a player can do or user can do, et cetera, become so much more compelling because they understand the foundation, the points they're jumping from A to B. And that gives the verbs that they're doing so much more meaning because they're more grounded physical concepts. And the reason why those concepts are so important is that, especially when you're developing for a mobile phone and an app, you have a limited amount of screen real estate. And not just necessarily older users, but users of all ages. You've got this kind of mechanical dexterity that you need to deal with, the imprecision of the fingertips. And all that comes together in this perfect storm. So if you can figure out a metaphor or a mental framework that aligns with how we think our users think, and we can test, if you can find and put in front of them the right objects, sometimes those are literal objects like cards on the screen or badges or icons on the screen. Sometimes they're a little bit more intangible like groups or bundles or quests. And that can really, really make the UI itself a lot more self-evident in terms of buttons and drop downs and sidebars and all these other interface components that any good modern app will have. So this process allows us to make sure that we stay really empathetic, that we always are considering the user's perspective, and to make sure that when we get into a good spirited debate about the right color for a button or about how a progress bar animates, or and I'm not making a joke here. What's the right amount of congratulations confetti that should sprinkle down from the top of the screen when the user hits a right big milestone? We found that there is a limit where
there's a formula for this, right?
Yeah, there's got to be there's diminishing returns, both in terms of the processor, the phone's processor rendering confetti, and also people saying, okay, this is excessive. this is cheapening my achievement. That helps you make sure that you have this broader philosophical direction to kind of align on. And so everything else from there is just down to tools and how you render pixels and things like that. But those are the major beats that we go through in our process. And we're very, very always encouraged and inspired by gamification. And it's profound how similar and how much overlap there is, where as you're thinking about how somebody interacts with the system and how they hopefully have at least, and not a bad time, but ideally a fun time, there seems to be so much in common with some of these broader gamification trends that we've been observing.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. So we do have a process, as you can see, Engagers. Jordan's focus is a lot in UX. So we are learning a lot of UX here as well, which is refreshing as well. And we really appreciate that. Just a quick break before we continue. Are you enjoying this podcast? If you're listening through a podcasting app, please subscribe and rate us on the app. This will be of great help to reach more engagers so we can change the world together through gamification. So, Jordan, what would you say in creating games and gamification and game-based solutions and whatever, would you say that there is some sort of best practice or something that when you incorporate these ideas, strategies, ways of doing things or tactics into a project that is trying to create these solutions, it tends to improve them, it helps them a lot? What do you think about that?
That's a great question. I think one of the things that is often missing for a lot of experiences that take into account gamification is this idea of rhythm and dynamics. And what I mean by that is the back and forth, the actual feel. It's almost like a choreography or a timing of your experience. It's often missing, or it's often not well accounted for. As you get closer to pure video games, there are action games and there are literal rhythm games where whether or not you can stay on the beat, that's what you're measured on. Those really figure out the right feel. Famously, the first Super Mario game had this concept of sticky friction, where if you reverse direction too much, Mario would kind of skid a little bit instead of instantaneously immediately running off in the other direction. Like I said, we're all physical beings, and even the most pensive, thoughtful, patient player has a heartbeat, right? Hopefully has a healthy sleep cycle, has a circadian rhythm. This motion is so critically important. So whether it's prototyping, which has never been easier, whether it's just simply printing things out, whether it's calling up a friend and having them kind of interact with you, whether it's creating a quick, testable, clickable prototype on an online tool, just going through that and feeling that physical timing out as your game plays out over time is so, so crucial and so invaluable. Yes, the copywriting has to matter. Yes, the art has to matter. Yes, all the details and the metaphors and the mechanics have to matter. But I find that it's only when you actually see it living and you actually see it breathing that you can figure out, oh, this feels too fast. This feels too slow. This feels clunky because of how inconsistent it is. And so many of those problems could have been avoided if simply a lower resolution of the arc, the loop, the round, the hand, whatever it is you're working on, was just tested out, even verbally. And so that technique of rhythm and dynamics is just as critical in app design and any good modern app design as it is in every game that we've ever worked on.
So we're almost going from UX to music. So the rhythm here, which makes a 100%. Complete lot of sense. I'm laughing because I think it's very interesting, but
fantastic.
As you can see, we're covering a very big, very broad place here. And I do think it makes a lot of sense. Like there are small details there, which, again, having them tested out is always very, very important. And the more you can test in more places, the higher the chances you'll have of having a better product. So I completely agree with that. So
exactly.
Jordan, what would you say is, I mean, after listening to the interview, to the questions, I don't know if you've heard a couple of episodes or more, is there somebody that comes to your mind? Is there somebody that you'd like to listen to in an episode like this one in Professor Game? Again, whether he or she has been around before or not.
Actually, yes. There's a games series that recently came out called Panda Craves Danger. And it's a card game, and it's made by a company called Devious Devices. And there's two gentlemen, Anthony Rando and Eric Cesare. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. They've also created a few licensed board games, but they've been a guest editor on this website, a League of Game Makers, and they have a lot of really accessible, tangible thoughts that we've referenced here internally as we were trying to come to grips with this. But they have a fantastic way of taking some of these headier concepts and making them feel like they're common sense. Because a lot of the times when we're making a product, we aren't just trying to convince our users and our players, but also help trying to explain to our clients why this is the right path. And some of their work has been very, very helpful in us trying to understand how to better communicate gamification.
That makes sense. Beautiful. So those sound like very, very good possible guests for the future. And in the same sense of recommendations and things that come to your mind, if you had to recommend one book to the engagers, to this audience, what book would that be, and of course, why?
The book that I've recently reread, and what I loved when it first came out, is a title called, the book is called Badass, Making Users Awesome. And it's by an author named Kathy Sierra. And what she unpacks through a very entertaining and very almost graphical style is the arc of why generally users, but it's directly applicable to players and learners, why they even do this, right? Why they even go and put themselves into these positions, and the true arc of how to get them there. And it's not a secret, so I'm not spoiling the book, but the way that you read the book is in itself a hero's journey, if you will, where you are becoming more equipped to the tools as Kathy is showing you how everything fits together. And it's such a great perennial read because, yes, the details matter. Yes, the tactics matter, and you have to make sure that everything's polished. But there can always be that point where you're so close to everything working where you can kind of lose sight of the learner, the player, the human involved, the user in our case. And so it's just really great to go back to there and figure out, okay, why are people actually sitting down to play something? Why are they actually here? And how do we want to make them feel? And I think it's that feeling, going back to my first lesson that I was talking about, where yes, there's the logical reasons, yes, the various motivations, but when we talk about the kind of the best version of the player, the best version of the learner, this book is a fantastic way, a fantastic mental framework to kind of unpack that and make sure that you really hold those philosophies dear to your heart.
That makes sense. And it also, when you were talking about that, it reminded me as well as your question, and something I was going to comment that I forgot was about, people being as, I forgot the name of the author, of predictably irrational, so it's...
Oh, yes, that's right. Yep, that's right. Yeah,
so
that's
a in a way that all ties together as well. That's a great recommendation. Sounds like a very good book. I had never heard of it, but certainly is going to come down to my list as well. And what would you say, Jordan, when we're talking about these subjects, games and gamification and UX, what would you say is your superpower?
That is a fantastic question. I can tell you that I don't have a very good poker face. When I lie, it's pretty obvious. So that would not be my superpower. I think what would be my superpower, though, is that I can very quickly pick up on underlying patterns or frameworks that kind of unite the entire experience together. Not to say that I don't care about the details, but my ability to kind of see the matrix and broadly understand how the different components all interact together, that's something where I'm usually, the first in the door on a new project to kind of scout out the overall landscape.
That is a definite superpower. So, Jordan, we've arrived to something that most guests have quoted as the most difficult question of the podcast, so get ready.
Okay.
We would like to know, what is your favorite game?
Yeah, this is this was a tough one. I'm gonna cheat. I've got a couple of short answers. So my favorite gaming franchise right now is the series Assassin's Creed, and particularly because of the meta narrative and the historical fiction, you are a player that is playing and controlling another player. And so they found some really clever ways of acknowledging the fact that you can die and come back to life, that you can try things over again. And that meta layer I thought was really, really awesome. And I'm a sucker for a good alternate history, secret societies and conspiracies. Very entertaining. By hours invested, like you said at the beginning, I've calloused thumbs from fighting in Smash Brothers Online. I'm not nearly good enough to make it to the tournament scene, but I can definitely crush some internet strangers there. And then a game that I've been enjoying, my last answer, the game that I've been enjoying really recently, it's this game called Control. And the reason why I love Control is that they have taken this world and they have written so many optional little scraps and tidbits where it's a very well lived in and complete world. And back to that word I can't pronounce, that verisimilitude. It doesn't just feel like you're in a theme park ride where you're being toured through. It actually feels like you are contributing to and participating in this very X-Files kind of odd but very quirky and fun with a very distinct Finnish sensibility. It's a lot of Finnish developers, and that's the game Control. So that's been a fantastic play, and I think right now that might be my game of the year.
So there you go. A little bit of cheating, but that is okay because we're talking about games, so not too bad. So Jordan, we're basically running out of time, but I don't want to let you go before you give us any final quick piece of advice you want to leave the engagers with. Of course, let us know where we can find more about Brave UX, about Jordan DeVries and so on, maybe social media, web pages and whatnot. And then, of course, as usual, we will say that for now, it's game over.
Okay, fantastic. So my quick advice would be to not start your gamification strategy with arbitrary points, badges, levels, or tiers. You should think about the role or the journey of your player and their intrinsic motivation. And that way you can recognize that every game, like I said earlier, is really built on challenge and built on how can we empower a user to get scrambled out of that disadvantaged state. Once you can figure that out, points are the symptom. They're a good tool. But we're really trying to figure out how a player's mastery and ideally a sense of fun are the true end goal. So that's my quick advice. Regarding how people can get in touch with me. Yes. I like to wrestle with the deep questions. If you want to wrestle with the deep questions with me or come and fight me online in video games, I'm at the Astral J, TheAstralJ, all one word, on Twitter and Instagram. You can check out my team's work at BraveUX, BraveUX.com. And I strongly encourage you all to try out the LifeSense app. That's LIFECENTS, sense like percent. And that's on the web, Android and iOS. And check out the financial wellness gamification for yourself.
That sounds fantastic. So thank you again very much, Jordan, for being tonight. In the case of Spain, you probably have a lot of light of day still left for yourself back there in Washington. But for now, and for today, it is time to say that it's game over. Hey, Engagers. Thank you for listening to Professor Game Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Jordan. Are you using Instagram? I'm now posting stories almost every day and would love to connect with you there. Just like on Twitter, my username is RobAlvarezB, all one word. And before you go on to your next mission, would you like to know how to talk with colors instead of words through a game? Then subscribe using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there!